They weren't supposed to do these experiments, and maybe reality wasn't supposed to survive them. For decades, hidden labs, military bunkers, and private research facilities have pushed science far beyond the limits written in textbooks. Not to cure disease, not to explore space, but to break the rules of existence itself. Some of these projects leaked through declassified documents. Others survived only as eyewitness reports and whispers from the people who saw what should never have been seen. Experiments that bent time, split consciousness, opened gateways, cracked particles, and brushed against the edges of dimensions were not meant to touch. Tonight, we reopened 10 forbidden science experiments that didn't just study reality, they changed it. Welcome to Archive 9. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union feared one thing above all, that the West was developing technologies that could bend the rules of perception itself. So in the early 1960s, deep beneath the Ural Mountains, a classified research program was created. Its official name remains unknown, but in leaked documents it appears under a single word: biolocation. The concept seems simple, but also dangerously ambitious. If a person could use consciousness to detect objects at a distance, you wouldn't need radar, satellites, or any electronic devices at all. You would only need a mind capable of reaching out beyond the limits of the human body. One report describes the first series of experiments using a group of sensitives, individuals with unusually strong intuition. They were placed in a sealed chamber lined with thick steel to block all electromagnetic signals. No light, no electronics, no tools, only a single task: tell us what's inside the box in the next room. What happened next left the research team unsettled. A few participants got the answer right. Not always, not all of them, but the accuracy was far beyond random chance. So far that the scientists repeated the test several times, hoping the anomaly would disappear. Instead, it grew. One subject, identified only as S14, quickly became the focus of the program. In one experiment, she was asked to locate a small heat source placed inside a building nearly 2 miles away. The test was designed to see whether consciousness could step out of the body and detect environmental changes from afar. She closed her eyes. Nothing happened for nearly a minute, and then she calmly said, "Third floor, east side, second room." The team froze, not because she was correct, but because of how she described the experience. "I didn't see it with my eyes," she said. "I was standing there." Another report details a more advanced test. Tracking a moving object, a technician rolled a metal ball through different rooms at random intervals. S14 was asked to report its position in real time. The results were inconsistent, but occasionally she gave the correct location seconds before the technician recorded it, as if she was sensing the movement before it physically occurred. That was when fear entered the program. A leaked meeting transcript mentions the possibility that the temporal component may be influenced during deep focus states. No one dared to draw conclusions, but shortly afterward, the entire project was relocated to a higher security military facility. The biolocation program expanded into what many today call remote perception, a form of awareness beyond physical space. Some subjects described unseen objects in rooms they had never entered. Others sensed the movement of people outside the laboratory. A 1992 file, one of the few that survived, contains just one chilling line: "The effect does not depend on distance." By the late Cold War, the unit was abruptly shut down. No public statement, no official summary. The records were sealed, and the project disappeared from history. Only scattered copies of notes, preserved by former researchers, tell us it ever existed. And the question that has troubled scientists for decades remains, what were they actually seeing? Was it an extreme form of intuition, a psychological illusion, or a hidden capability of the human mind, one that modern science has not yet begun to understand? No firm answer has ever been given, but if those documents are real, then biolocation wasn't just a study of human perception. It was proof that consciousness may reach into a place beyond space and time, a place no nation ever wanted the world to discover. In the autumn of 1943, with World War II at its peak, the U.S. Navy announced that it was testing a new technology designed to make warships invisible to radar. That was the official explanation. But what witnesses reported was something else entirely. The destroyer escort USS Eldridge was docked at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, surrounded by coils of electromagnetic cables, unlike anything in known military use at the time. The idea, according to declassified fragments, was to create a field strong enough to bend radar waves around the ship. But on the day of the test, the field did something radar was never meant to do. It didn't mask the ship, it removed it. A dock worker later wrote in his journal, "It didn't vanish from the radar, it vanished from the world." When the machinery roared to life, a strange green haze formed around the hull. The air shimmered as if heated from within. Witnesses described a flash, a distortion, like looking at metal through boiling water. And then the Eldridge was gone. Not hidden, not cloaked. Gone. Seconds passed, or minutes. Accounts differ. But when the ship reappeared, the haze collapsed inward, like reality stitching itself back together. The Eldridge returned to exactly where it had been, but its crew did not return the same. Unofficial notes describe sailors vomiting, screaming, disoriented. Some seemed unable to perceive where they were, but the most disturbing claims came from those who said several men were found embedded in the metal hull, as if the boundary between flesh and steel had briefly lost meaning. One anonymous technician reportedly whispered, "Matter separated and came back wrong. No one wants to call it what it was." The experiment was immediately shut down. The U.S. Navy denied everything and still does today. But the story refused to die because it didn't end in Philadelphia. A leaked account from the 1950s claims that, at the same moment the Eldridge vanished, a handful of sailors appeared hundreds of miles away at the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, without traveling by any physical means. They describe bright light, a sensation of falling sideways, and then being somewhere else. If true, this wouldn't just be invisibility. It would be the first known case of macroscopic teleportation. But the strangest details came from interviews decades later with surviving crewmen. One sailor said he saw shapes moving outside the ship during the disappearance, shapes that didn't belong in any ocean or sky. Another described the space around him bending like wet glass. Modern physicists dismiss these stories as fantasy. According to them, no magnetic field, no matter how strong, could bend space-time to such extremes, at least not with the technology known to exist in 1943. But fringe researchers argue that the Navy may have been testing something far more experimental, a device meant not to hide the ship, but to shift it out of phase with the surrounding world. Not faster than light, not teleportation, Something stranger, stepping out of the three-dimensional frame entirely, then snapping back in. This might explain why the ship vanished instantly, without displacement. It might explain the sailor's disorientation. It might even explain the horrific fusion of bodies and metal. If, for a brief moment, every object on board existed in a state with no physical boundaries at all, the Navy maintains the entire story as a myth. But buried in the archive of declassified Navy projects is a curious entry: electromagnetic mass displacement trials. The project began the same year the Eldridge incident supposedly occurred. No results, no files, just a start date and a termination date. And in the silence between those 2 days, some believe the U.S. Navy opened a door into a place no ship was ever meant to go, and learned why it must never be opened again. In the early 1970s, inside a quiet corner of Stanford University, a small group of physicists and psychologists began an experiment that even today makes many scientists uneasy. Officially, it was called the Stanford Research Institute's Remote Perception Program. Unofficially, it became known as something far more controversial: the Psi Lab. Unlike many paranormal stories, this one didn't begin with rumors or legends. It began with government funding. According to declassified documents, several U.S. intelligence agencies quietly invested in a study exploring whether the human mind could gather information from places it had never physically visited, not by satellites, not by surveillance, but through a process they called remote viewing, a mental projection of consciousness across space. The researchers wanted to know one thing: can the mind see what the eyes cannot? To test this, they brought in volunteers with no background in psychic phenomena: engineers, artists, technicians, even students. Participants were placed in a sealed room, given only a pen and paper, and asked to describe a target location chosen at random from hundreds of possibilities. These locations range from bridges to secret test sites, from government buildings to natural landmarks thousands of miles away. The results should have been nonsense, but they weren't. One subject, identified in documents only as Viewer 37, described a location in Northern California: a metallic dome surrounded by trees, with a narrow access road and a large antenna. The target chosen that day was a remote radio observatory. His drawing matched the shape of the main structure almost exactly. At first, the scientists suspected coincidence, so they tried again. Different target, different time, same accuracy. Another participant sketched the interior of a classified military complex, details so precise that, according to later congressional testimony, intelligence analysts became deeply concerned. The Psi Lab quickly shifted from scientific curiosity to national security asset. By 1975, the project expanded. Subjects were now asked to describe ongoing activities inside distant facilities: machinery being tested, number of personnel, even the layout of rooms concealed underground. Some drawings were dismissed, but others were so accurate that intelligence officials demanded the results be kept confidential. One internal memo from that era contains a line that still raises questions: viewer data corroborated by satellite imagery. Those words blurred the boundary between science and something else entirely. But the experiments did not stop at distance. They began touching on something far stranger: time. In one series of tests, remote viewers were told to describe a location not in the present, but 24 hours in the future. Shockingly, several reports matched events verified the next day. Objects moved, people arriving, even weather changes. A physicist at the lab wrote, "If correct, this suggests consciousness is not bound by forward temporal flow." Not surprisingly, those notes never appeared in any formal publication. There were also reports of a phenomenon the researchers called the bleed-through effect. Remote viewers sometimes described unexpected shapes, distortions, or patterns of light around the target, elements that did not exist in the physical environment. One viewer claimed to perceive a curved space behind a building, as if the location itself was bending. The lab never identified what these anomalies were. They simply wrote that they did not correlate with known physical structures. By the early 1980s, the program had grown too large and too strange to keep hidden. Funding was moved through layers of classified channels. Some scientists left, unwilling to attach their names to research that could damage their careers. Others stayed, convinced they were witnessing the edge of undiscovered science. After 2 decades, the project was quietly shut down. The official reason: no actionable intelligence. But the declassified materials tell another story. They show patterns, matches, consistencies that no statistical model can comfortably explain. Most puzzling of all is a final note written by one of the lab's senior researchers shortly before the program ended. The mechanism remains unknown, but whatever this is, it is real and it is not limited by space. To this day, scientists argue over what the Psi Lab truly discovered: hallucination, coincidence, or evidence that human consciousness can reach beyond physical distance and perhaps beyond the arrow of time itself. Whatever the answer is, the Psi Lab left behind a question that still unnerves those who study it. If the mind can see farther than the eyes, what else can it do that we haven't dared to test? In the 1950s, long before digital screens and satellites became part of daily life, the Vatican allegedly oversaw a device that should not have existed in that era, a machine not designed to communicate with heaven or to explore theology, but to do something far more dangerous: to look into time itself. This device is known in leaked accounts as the chronovisor, a project said to be created by a team of physicists, engineers, and priests working in complete secrecy. One of them was Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a respected Benedictine monk and accomplished scholar. Ernetti later claimed publicly that he had helped build a machine capable of retrieving and displaying events from the distant past. Not imagination, not visions, literal images and sounds from history. According to his writings, the chronovisor worked by detecting residual energy patterns, echoes of events imprinted onto the fabric of space-time. In theory, everything that has ever happened leaves a signature. If you could decode these signatures, you could watch history unfold exactly as it occurred. The idea sounds impossible, but Ernetti described the machine with unsettling precision: an array of antennas, oscillating crystals, electromagnetic amplifiers, and a curved viewing screen. He said it could tune into vibrational coordinates left behind by human actions, like a cosmic radio picking up lost broadcasts. If true, this was more than a time viewer. It was a threat to every secret humanity has ever kept. Ernetti claimed the chronovisor captured scenes from ancient Rome, including a performance of a lost tragedy by the poet Quintus Ennius. He also said it recorded the final hours of Jesus of Nazareth, a statement so controversial that even the Vatican distanced itself from it. But those who study the case note something strange. The Vatican never explicitly denied the device existed. They only said it was dismantled. The question is, dismantled by whom and for what reason? In the 1990s, a leaked document surfaced describing a Vatican meeting discussing ethical dangers of the chronovisor. The notes warned that the machine could be used to obtain political leverage, manipulate personal histories, or expose private actions. The most chilling line was this: the past is not the only vulnerable direction. This suggests the chronovisor might not have been limited to history. It may have touched the edge of the future, or at least something resembling it. Some researchers believe the machine created a form of resonance that tapped into probabilities, showing not fixed events but possible outcomes. This would mean that the chronovisor wasn't only a window, but a mirror reflecting branching timelines. If that is true, then the biggest threat wasn't revealing the past. It was influencing what comes next. Accounts from engineers who claim to have seen the machine describe moments when the viewer displayed scenes that never occurred. One scene allegedly showed a papal procession that did not match any known record. Another depicted a natural disaster that has no place in our historical timeline. Was this a malfunction, a hallucination, or glimpses of paths reality did not choose? Critics argue that Ernetti fabricated everything, but there are inconsistencies in the official dismissal. For example, Ernetti's technical descriptions contain knowledge he should not have had. Several scientists he named were real experts in fields related to electromagnetic imaging. A photograph he produced of the crucifixion matched no known artwork, yet also displayed anatomical details inconsistent with medieval depictions. The most telling sign, however, comes from a 2002 report that claimed the Vatican issued a formal warning stating that devices capable of viewing past events were classified as a threat to national and spiritual security. Why issue a warning about a machine that supposedly never existed? Those who believe in the chronovisor say the Vatican destroyed it because it crossed a line no institution, religious or scientific, should cross. But there is another theory, a darker one. Some suggest the device was not destroyed at all. It was hidden, locked away because it still works. And because someone realized that while the past may be fixed, the act of observing it might not be. If the chronovisor ever truly existed, it raises a question far more unsettling than whether we can see history. What if history can see us back? In 2008, when the Large Hadron Collider at CERN fired its first proton beam, scientists celebrated the birth of the world's most powerful particle accelerator. Officially, the goal was simple: understand the smallest building blocks of the universe. But as the collider reached energies humanity had never produced before, something unexpected happened. Something recorded quietly in internal logs but never released publicly. A 0.4-second data gap, not a malfunction, not a computer glitch. A complete and inexplicable loss of spatial telemetry from several detectors, data that, according to the logs, did not follow any known physical model. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the collider actually does. When protons collide at nearly the speed of light, they release enormous bursts of energy, energy that warps the fabric of space-time for a fraction of a second. Normally, this curvature is microscopic, harmless, and collapses immediately. But in late 2012, during a high-energy collision run, sensors in the Atlas and CMS detectors registered something new: a localized distortion that behaved as though space itself had been stretched and then displaced. One researcher wrote in a private memo, "It did not bend, it shifted." The numbers suggested a temporary expansion of spatial volume, like a bubble forming and collapsing inside reality. To most physicists, this was impossible, but the anomaly persisted for several runs over the next 3 weeks. In one case, a robotic monitoring arm inside the tunnel recorded a slight positional drift, 6 millimeters, during the exact moment of the distortion. The drift did not match thermal expansion, magnetic interference, or mechanical error. It matched nothing. It was as if the device had been nudged by something that wasn't there. Rumors began spreading among staff. Some said they saw shimmering waves in the tunnel's air during high-energy cycles. Others described brief moments where distant objects seemed shifted sideways, like reflections in warped glass. One physicist later admitted anonymously, "It felt like the room stretched, but the walls didn't move." Then came the most puzzling event. During a collision run in early 2015, an array of detectors picked up particle signatures that did not match any known decay pattern. Not exotic matter, not dark matter, something else. A cluster of particles appeared for less than a trillionth of a second. Particles with trajectories implying movement from outside the collision point, as if entering the chamber rather than being created within it. A senior researcher noted, "The directional vectors suggest an origin beyond the interaction field." In other words, the particles weren't produced inside the collider. They might have come from somewhere else. Publicly, the anomaly was never acknowledged. Privately, the incident was nicknamed the Gateway Spike. Some scientists theorized that the collider had briefly opened a microscopic window, an interface between our spacetime and another region of the quantum vacuum. A dimensional fluctuation, a short-lived tear. Others rejected that idea entirely, until 2018. A security camera near the collider's main ring recorded an odd event. A section of the tunnel flickered, not visually, but electronically. The camera timestamp froze for 0.2 seconds, while a nearby radiation sensor showed an unexplained spike. When the timestamp resumed, it was ahead by a fraction of a second, implying the camera had skipped forward in time. Engineers blamed the power grid. Technicians blamed the camera. But the logs show no electrical fault. One internal note reads, "If the distortions affect time perception within localized volumes, further testing is unsafe." After that incident, several planned high-energy runs were postponed indefinitely. To this day, CERN publicly denies any talk of dimensional gateways, insisting the anomalies were experimental noise or misinterpreted data. And they might be right. But there is one detail that remains difficult to ignore. In the official CERN archive, the logs for the exact period of the gateway spike are missing. Not redacted, not corrupted, removed. The only trace is a placeholder file containing a single line. Spatial irregularity, investigation closed. Whether the collider bent reality or simply confused its sensors, no one outside CERN truly knows. But the idea that the world's most powerful machine may have touched the edge of another dimension, if only for a heartbeat, is a possibility that still keeps physicists awake at night. Because if a doorway opened once, what stops it from opening again? In the late 1980s, buried inside a private neuroscience institute whose name never appeared on any government registry, a group of researchers attempted something that even they admitted bordered on the impossible. Their goal was not to study the brain. It was to study the division of awareness, to prove that consciousness was not a single unified stream, but something that could be split, separated, and observed from the outside. The project began with an unassuming foundation, a series of sensory deprivation experiments. Volunteers were placed in sealed rooms with no sound, no light, and no external cues. Over time, researchers noticed an odd pattern. Subjects started reporting the sensation of watching themselves from a distance. At first, the scientists dismissed these as hallucinations, but then the descriptions became too consistent. One participant, labeled Subject A9, described floating behind his own body, observing himself with a clarity that should not have been possible. His report included details about objects in the room, objects he could not physically see from his position. When questioned, he said, "It felt like there were two of me, one inside and one standing beside myself." Intrigued, the team pushed further. They introduced a technique involving synchronized electromagnetic pulses directed at separate regions of the brain. The idea was to create a temporary desynchronization between hemispheres, essentially forcing the mind to operate on two different channels. The result was far beyond what anyone expected. Subjects began speaking in fragmented sentences, as if two internal voices were trying to respond at once. Heart rate and brainwave patterns diverge in unusual ways. In one test, a participant's right hand began performing actions she later insisted she had not intended, while the left hand froze completely. The researchers called this phenomenon dual agency dissociation. But what came next challenged even that term. During a critical session in 1991, Subject Anon reported something unprecedented. While connected to the monitoring equipment, he claimed he could see himself from multiple angles at the same time. Not reflections, not memories. He described it as me standing in three different spots, all watching the version of me lying on the table. When asked which version was the real him, his answer was unsettling. All of them, and none of them. The brainwave data recorded during this event showed patterns that neuroscientists still cannot explain. Two separate clusters of neural activity behaving independently, overlapping only at irregular intervals. It was as if the subject had temporarily developed a second mind. The team theorized that consciousness might not be a single unit, but something modular, something that could branch, duplicate, or even detach under the right circumstances. But the experiments carried a darker turn. Several subjects suffered episodes in which they claimed they could not return to the primary body. One volunteer described watching her body breathe on the table while she remained stuck, behind her own head, unable to reconnect. She screamed for 20 minutes, insisting the researchers had broken the tether. When the episode ended, she collapsed into uncontrollable sobbing. After this incident, the project halted all high-intensity trials. But according to leaked notes, a smaller subgroup of researchers continued the work in secret, convinced they were close to proving their theory. A final surviving memo from the project contains the most haunting statement of all. When the mind separates, it seeks form. What manifests on the outside may not always match what remains within. No one knows what that meant. Some believe the test produced temporary out-of-body illusions. Others think the researchers glimpsed a deeper truth, that consciousness may have layers, some internal, some external, and under extreme conditions, those layers can split and experience reality independently. The facility shut down in 1994. Officially, it never existed. The equipment was dismantled. The volunteers were released under non-disclosure agreements. The research files vanished from the public record. But those who work there say the same thing. They walked away not because the tests failed, but because they succeeded more than anyone was prepared to handle. The most disturbing question left behind is this. If a person can split their consciousness, what happens to the part that doesn't come back? During the final years of World War II, deep within the mountains of Lower Silesia, Nazi scientists were said to be working on a device so strange, so far outside known physics, that even classified Allied documents referred to it only by a code name, Die Glocke, the bell. To the outside world, it sounded like myth. But the more historians uncovered, the more disturbing the story became. According to a series of testimonies from captured SS officers and documents recovered after the war, Die Glocke was not a bomb, not an aircraft, and not a communication system. It was a rotating high-energy chamber filled with two counter-rotating cylinders. When powered on, these cylinders allegedly produced an intense violet glow and emitted radiation so lethal that several researchers died during early tests. The substance used inside the machine, referred to in notes only as Zerum 525, was described as a metallic, dark, mercury-like liquid stored in thick lead containers. It was said to behave in ways no known substance should, altering weight, heat signatures, and magnetic responses. Witnesses claimed that when Die Glocke was activated, objects placed near it began to distort. Plants shriveled instantly. Animals exposed to the field suffered grotesque disorientation, their bodies twisting as if affected by forces not of this world. One scientist, interrogated after the war, described it simply as a machine that bends the field around matter. But the strangest reports came from those who stood inside the underground bunker where the device was housed. Several technicians recounted seeing the walls ripple, not physically, but visually, as if space itself wavered like a heat mirage. Others claimed that shadows began appearing where no light source existed, moving in unnatural directions. One guard swore under oath that he saw the silhouette of his own body lag behind him, like a second outline delayed by half a second. Then came the most chilling testimony of all. A senior engineer described a test in which Die Glocke ran for a full minute. During that time, he reported seeing a dark mass forming around the device, almost like a dense mist that absorbed light. Within that haze, he noticed shapes, faint contours of something large and moving, as though a second environment had briefly overlapped with the bunker. He said, "It felt like the room was sharing space with somewhere else. Was it a portal? A field distortion? A byproduct of extreme electromagnetism?" No one agreed on an explanation, but one detail appeared consistently. The engineers were told explicitly never to touch the outer shell of the machine during operation. Several who accidentally did were reported to have suffered severe neurological breakdowns within hours, their perception of time fragmenting into loops and gaps. One survivor described living the same 12 seconds repeatedly, aware of the loop but unable to break it. After the war, Allied forces launched Operation Paperclip to seize advanced German technologies. Many rockets, aircraft, and prototypes were captured, but Die Glocke was not among them. The entire device vanished. All that remained was the concrete structure near the Wenceslaus mine, an odd circular frame made of reinforced pillars, now known as the hinge. No machinery, no cylinders, no Zerum 525, only an empty shell. Multiple theories emerged. 1. The device was destroyed by the SS before Allied arrival possible, but the depth of the excavation suggests otherwise. 2. It was moved to South America, a common theory tied to high-ranking officials who fled there. 3. It was taken by a foreign government. Some researchers argue the U.S. retrieved it secretly and buried the project within early Cold War black programs. 4. It opened a field effect that consumed itself. The darkest theory of all, suggesting the machine's final test destabilized its environment enough to erase its own presence from the site. One declassified Allied memo, dated 1947, contains only one line referring to Die Glock. Field manipulation results exceed expected tolerances. Further testing is prohibited. If true, it implies not only that the Allies found the device, but that they understood it well enough to fear it. Whether Die Glock was a technological outlier, a failed experiment, or the first machine to distort space-time on a macroscopic level, no one alive can say for certain. But the testimonies, the missing equipment, and the unexplained structure still standing today all point toward the same unsettling conclusion. Something real was built under those mountains, something powerful, something we were never meant to activate again. And if Die Glock truly bent the space around matter, what else might have slipped through while it was running? In the mid-1990s, inside a biotechnology lab located somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, a group of researchers stumbled onto an anomaly that should not have existed. They weren't studying consciousness or physics or anything remotely metaphysical. They were studying the vibrational behavior of DNA. The project was funded under a simple premise: if every molecule vibrates at a particular frequency, then DNA, the blueprint of all living organisms, should vibrate in predictable, measurable ways. By identifying these patterns, scientists hope to improve genetic imaging and early disease detection. But during one late-night experiment, something unexpected happened. A graduate researcher, adjusting a low-frequency electromagnetic field around a strand of isolated DNA, noticed a sudden spike, an oscillation that did not match any known harmonic signature. It was as if the DNA had reacted, not passively, but actively. The team ran the test again, same response. Then again, and the oscillation grew stronger, as though the DNA was syncing itself to the frequency being applied. A senior biophysicist, who later leaked parts of the incident, described it like this: "It was not a chemical reaction, it was a resonance event." To test whether this was a fluke, they introduced a series of frequencies, systematically moving up the spectrum. At certain frequencies, the DNA remained inert. At others, it behaved strangely, twisting, expanding, or contracting in ways that defied temperature, humidity, and all known biochemical behavior. Then they found the frequency that changed everything. At a very specific narrow band, the double helix emitted light, not reflected light, not fluorescence caused by the environment, but a faint pulsing biophotonic glow emanating from the strand itself. The team froze. Light emission was something DNA was not supposed to do, at least not without external triggers like UV radiation or chemical excitation. Yet here it was, glowing under a frequency field so weak it shouldn't have affected the molecule at all. The experiment escalated. Researchers placed multiple DNA samples in isolated containers, each separated physically so that no chemical or electromagnetic contamination could occur. When they activated the resonance frequency for one sample, something unbelievable happened. The other samples began glowing too. No physical link, no electrical connection, no measurable radiation between them, and yet they responded as if the strands were communicating through an unseen channel. One researcher wrote, "The samples behaved like tuning forks. One vibrated, and the others followed." As the experiments continued, the resonance effects became even stranger. In one trial, the team introduced a virus sample near a pulsing DNA strand. The virus's replication rate dropped significantly, as though the frequency had disrupted its ability to bind with the host DNA. In another test, the frequency altered the folding pattern of a protein chain, changing its behavior entirely. None of this lined up with standard molecular biology. But the most disturbing observation came when the researchers increased the resonance intensity. One sample of DNA began to unwind, not from heat, not from chemical degradation, but in what appeared to be a controlled decoupling of the helix. When the frequency was turned off, the DNA rewound itself back into its normal conformation. It was as if the molecule had a built-in mechanism to respond to vibrational information, a form of biological signaling no one had ever documented. A physicist consulting on the project wrote, "We may be looking at the language behind genetics, not the code, but the medium." The implications were too big, too dangerous, and too easy to misuse. If resonance could modify or influence DNA at a distance, then could diseases be triggered or suppressed without touching the body? Could genetic expressions be altered through frequency alone? Could biological communication occur beyond the biochemical level? And the biggest question, if DNA responds to frequency, who or what is transmitting? Shortly after the results began circulating internally, the project was abruptly shut down. Equipment was dismantled, samples destroyed. The team was reassigned to unrelated research and bound by strict non-disclosure agreements. When one of the scientists asked why, a supervisor gave a simple answer: "Because we found something we're not ready to understand." Today, the official record contains no mention of the resonance anomalies. The published papers exclude the key findings. The glowing DNA, the synchronized vibration, the cross-sample communication. None of it appears in the scientific literature. But the leak that revealed the project ended with a single sentence that continues to haunt researchers who have seen it. "The genome may not be a passive code. It may be an antenna." If that's true, then DNA is not just a blueprint of life, but a receiver, constantly listening to something science has not yet identified. And it raises a final unsettling possibility. If DNA can be tuned like an instrument, who first wrote the music? In the winter of 2003, a remote physics station deep in Siberia began detecting something they could not explain. The facility, built originally to study cosmic rays entering Earth's atmosphere, was equipped with an array of particle detectors buried beneath the frozen ground. Most days were uneventful, just noise, radiation fluctuations, and the occasional meteor shower. But on January 14th at 2:17 a.m., the detectors registered a burst of particles that defied every known model. The burst did not match cosmic rays. It did not match solar activity. It did not match any natural radiation signature known to exist. It was something new. The lead researcher called it a directional intrusion, a stream of particles entering from a specific angle, unlike anything measured before. Even stranger, the particles appeared to travel upward from the ground, not downward from space, When the team checked the seismic logs, they found no earthquake or tectonic activity. The ice layers beneath the site were stable. And yet the detectors repeatedly recorded bursts that looked as though they were coming from inside the Earth. Over the next 3 weeks, the anomaly grew stronger. The bursts became more frequent, and the directional pattern became clearer. It was not random. It was not natural. It was forming a shape. The particle trajectories mapped onto a thin vertical plane, like a sheet carved into the atmosphere. One researcher compared it to a curtain of energy rising from the Earth's crust. The team began referring to it as the rift. To study it more closely, they deployed drones with electromagnetic sensors over the region. What they captured startled them. The air above the anomaly showed micro-distortions consistent with refractive bending, similar to heat waves but in temperatures of 30 degrees. In the footage, distant objects shifted slightly as though light was being bent by an invisible force. A physicist on the team later wrote, "Space did not stretch, it trembled." Then came the event that changed everything. On February 9th, the detectors recorded the largest burst yet, so intense that one of the instruments overloaded. When the team reviewed the logs, they discovered a 0.05-second gap where all sensors dropped to zero before spiking back to normal. The computers didn't crash. The power didn't fail. It was as if the detectors experienced a moment of non-existence, followed by a sudden return. If it were a glitch, it would have affected a single device. Instead, every sensor, electrical, thermal, magnetic, seismic, registered the same impossible gap, as though the environment itself flickered. The following night, a field technician stationed 2 kilometers from the anomaly reported something even stranger. He claimed the stars above the rift shifted sideways, like being reflected through a moving lens. He described seeing a faint outline in the darkness, an oblong shimmer, almost like a doorway, that pulsed and then vanished. His official incident report ended with the line, "The sky wasn't where it was supposed to be." The team initially suspected a localized magnetic anomaly, but the readings didn't match any terrestrial pattern. Instead, they resembled theoretical models of quantum tunneling events on a macroscopic scale, something no natural process could generate. Some physicists proposed an unsettling hypothesis. The rift might be a boundary, a thin region where subatomic particles temporarily slip out of alignment with Earth's space-time lattice. In simple terms, a place where the rules governing matter become loose. Others dismissed this entirely until they ran a laser test. A beam directed across the rift's coordinates showed an 8 mm lateral displacement without any obstruction. The beam did not bend around anything. It simply reappeared 8 mm to the right. The shift was tiny but undeniable. Something was altering the beam's endpoint, as though the space between point A and point B had momentarily rearranged itself. By early spring, the particle bursts suddenly stopped. The distortions vanished. The rift collapsed. Teams returned to the site in the summer, but the readings showed nothing unusual. The anomaly had closed, or perhaps moved. Months later, when the researchers attempted to publish their findings, the institution funding the project blocked the release. The lead scientist was reassigned. The facility was quietly repurposed. The only surviving evidence is a fragmented internal document labeled Siberian Event, Localized Spatial Drift. Cause unknown. What the team witnessed may have been a geological oddity, or the first recorded instance of a naturally occurring rift in space-time. If it was natural, it might appear again. If it wasn't, if something triggered it, then the more unsettling question emerges. Was something trying to come through or trying to get out? In the late 1990s, a classified program inside a remote Nevada desert facility conducted experiments the public would not learn about for decades. The objective wasn't weapons, propulsion, or surveillance. It was far stranger. They were attempting to build a device that could reflect space-time itself. Internally, it was called Project Looking Glass, but the scientists who worked on it used another name, the quantum mirror. The project began as a study of vacuum fluctuations, tiny, unpredictable distortions in empty space predicted by quantum field theory. Most physicists ignored these fluctuations. They were too small, too random, too brief to matter. But a small team inside the facility believed otherwise. They theorized that if these fluctuations could be amplified, shaped, and stabilized, they might form a reflective surface, not of light, but of probability, causing tiny fragments of the future and past to echo against the present. In early prototypes, the quantum mirror was nothing more than a metallic frame surrounding a sphere of rotating magnetic fields. But during one test in 2001, something unprecedented occurred. A researcher monitoring the device reported seeing a flicker, like a reflection of the room that wasn't quite the room. In his official log, he wrote, "The image was shifted, not forward or backward, but to the side in time." The mirror produced snapshots, objects appearing in positions they would occupy seconds later, sometimes minutes, occasionally hours. The researchers believed they were seeing temporal bleed-through, a momentary reflection of nearby probability states. But the bleed-through grew stronger. Within a year, the mirror began displaying images no one could immediately verify. Unfamiliar documents, unread newspapers, an empty hallway filled with daylight, even though the test was conducted at night. Some images aligned with events that later occurred. Others never did. One physicist noted, "The device does not show the future, it shows a future." To test this theory, the team conducted controlled experiments. They placed objects in front of the mirror, altered their positions, and measured how the reflections changed. In some trials, the reflected object moved before the real object was touched, as though anticipating the action. In others, the reflection remained frozen, unaffected by the changes in the room. It was becoming clear that the quantum mirror did not behave like a traditional temporal device. It behaved more like an interface, one that tapped into probabilistic branches of spacetime. The deeper the team went, the stranger the phenomena became. One researcher reported seeing a reflection of herself, but older, with different clothing, in a facility that did not match the one she was standing in. Another described a version of the lab where the equipment layout was reversed, as if mirrored by an alternate configuration of reality. But the most unsettling event occurred on a late-night test run in 2004. A technician monitoring the device alone saw something impossible. His own reflection turned toward him before he moved. He froze. The reflection raised its hand. He did not. The technician fled the room, and the test was terminated. His report was marked psychologically compromised, but internal logs from that night show a spike in field activity, one strong enough to trip sensors in adjacent buildings. Following the incident, the program shifted focus. Instead of trying to stabilize the mirror's images, the team began researching containment protocols. They feared the device was not simply reflecting other temporal states, but interacting with them. Over the next 2 years, the images became increasingly unstable. Some reflections showed distortions in the shape of the room itself, walls bending inward, lights flickering in patterns that didn't match the actual bulbs. In one case, the mirror displayed a facility completely dark and abandoned. In another, the device reflected the test chamber full of people, none of whom were present. A senior scientist wrote in a final memo, "The mirror does not show time, it shows possibility, and possibility looks back." Shortly after this memo, Project Looking Glass was shut down. The device was dismantled. Funding was reallocated. Personnel were reassigned or retired. Officially, the project yielded no operational results. Unofficially, the logs tell a different story. The last surviving document is a summary dated 2007 containing a single, cryptic conclusion. Temporal observation creates reciprocal probability pressure. The more we look, the more it looks back. Whether the quantum mirror was destroyed or simply stored away remains unknown. But those who studied it say the same thing. The future is not fixed. The past is not lost. Reality is not a line. It is a hall of mirrors. And somewhere, in one of those reflections, we are still standing in front of the device, watching ourselves watch it. In every age, humanity pushes the boundaries of science, but sometimes what we discover pushes back. From Soviet mind experiments, to vessels slipping out of phase, to machines that bent time, space, and possibility itself. One truth connects every file we open tonight. Reality is not as stable as we think. The deeper we dig, the more the edges blur. Between matter and mind, between past and future, between our world and whatever lies beside it. Some of these experiments were buried, some were erased, some were never meant to exist in the first place, but they all leave behind the same warning. There are places science can reach where humanity may not be ready to follow. If these 10 projects could twist the structure of the universe in ways we barely understand, then the real question isn't what they discovered. It's what they woke up. Because the moment we look into the unknown looks back. This has been Archive 9, and somewhere out there, another file is waiting to be opened.